Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this morning. My name is Andy. I'm the Partner Alliance Manager for Bytes. Today we have New Signature and Bytes talking about the journey to and using Microsoft Azure. New Signature have multiple gold accreditations, are our Bytes go-to partner for Microsoft Azure and cloud projects. From New Signature, we have Brian Lloyd and Julian Mallet. Brian is the Technology Transformation Director, and Julian is the UK Azure Practice Lead for New Signature. From Bytes, we have Fabienne Poquet, one of our Microsoft licensing specialist team. A quick bit of housekeeping. During the webinar, you are muted, but you can submit questions at any time via the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. There is a Q&A session at the end to answer all of these submitted questions. The webinar recording will be made available later today. Also, finally, if you can please complete the critique form at the end where you can request a call back from one of our specialists at Bytes. I will now pass you over to Brian to start the webinar.
I'm not sure if you heard that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Andy. Just a little bit about New Signature. So New Signature are a Microsoft-centric next-generation service provider, and we leverage our in-depth expertise around cloud and proprietary intellectual property to deliver business value and take customers through a digital transformation. So in terms of the organization, by the numbers, we're split up around 100 employees in the UK and around 300 over in North America. So we're about a 50 million revenue business globally. And we've got some significant investment from a private equity firm that's growing and building the business. And the way we like to think about New Signature is really we're of that sort of size of organization where we can outbig the big SIs and outbig the smaller companies. So we're in that sort of niche size of organization. In terms of our gold accreditations, we've got a number of sort of awards that we've won. We sit on the Microsoft Partner Advisory Council in Redmond, so we have sort of an in-depth view of the product teams and the roadmaps for various technology streams of Office 365 and Azure and all that kind of stuff. You know, we've probably got more Microsoft competencies than any other sort of Microsoft partner around gold and silver accreditations. In terms of the work that we do, we work across a number of verticals. We don't specialize in any particular vertical, and we really like to understand, you know, the business challenges that organizations are trying to solve with technology like Azure, and really where the value in you know, transforming that environment into a digital world and into Microsoft Azure and cloud technology, how that can actually solve business challenges. And as you can see, we've worked with some pretty big names. We've got some of these names that we're going to talk a little bit more about later in the webinar around how we sort of solve those business challenges in terms of the Azure journey. So in terms of our digital transformation approach, we really look at it from two areas in terms of data center modernization, around infrastructure and around applications. So from an infrastructure perspective, we look at, you know, how to solve the various pieces of legacy data center around application migration, identity and security, collaboration and communication, which is the Office 365 part, desktop and devices, which is the Windows 10, and how to modernize and mobilize people and how they use devices in a mobile world. And then the other part of that is the application transformation and how to sort of build born in the cloud native applications on the Azure platform. So really going digital, what does that mean to organizations, and how do you digitally differentiate yourself in the marketplace? And this is a challenge where that we talk to a lot of organizations about. And there's some surveys that have been done recently that have shown that by 2020, there'll be 1 million devices per hour coming online. And by 2020, the average age of an S&P 500 organization will be 12 years old. In 1960, the average age was 60 years. So that really shows you how companies are becoming younger and younger. And in fact, they don't need to have the significant investment that you traditionally had to have to compete with large organizations. You know, using technologies like Azure, you can really compete in this digital world very easily with fairly minimal upfront capital investment. So that's really something that we've seen. And by 2025, 60% of computing will be in the public cloud. And really we see that mobility is the catalyst for digital differentiation, and cloud computing is the answer. So some of the benefits to moving to the cloud, and I won't run through all of these, but these are the benefits that ring well with customers when we talk to them about data center modernization, moving to the cloud. What are the real business drivers behind that move? And if we look at some of the ones I'm going to call out here, for example, the security and compliance one, the Azure data center environment has enormous raft of compliance and accreditations, and for you to build the same level of compliance within your own on-premise data centers is costly, and it takes skills away from what's actually driving business value. So that's a pretty obvious one. Disaster recovery is another one that we see often, where a customer may be paying for a disaster recovery data center environment, and really it's a quick win to close down that disaster recovery environment and use Azure as your DR. So you don't have to maintain that second, pay for that second and maintain it. You can use and fail over to the Azure environment fairly easy. Business agility, I think that's a very good one as well, and we'll touch on this a little bit more in the case study later that we've got around this. But if you need to bring new ideas, new applications to fruition very quickly to digitally differentiate yourself against customers competitors, you can do that quite easily. With the Azure environment, you can bring these ideas to life and start realizing these applications in the cloud very, very quickly and easily. Optimizing costs, that's another good one, in terms of not having to work out these big capital investments in hardware refreshes and infrastructure transformation. You can see a more predictable cost, and you can optimize costs down, where instead of paying for oversized compute environments to meet your business needs for the next 5 years, you can only pay for what you actually need at that time, and then optimize it as you move forward. So these are the kind of common things that we see. So some questions that we often see customers asking themselves, I'm supposed to be an expert in all things new tech as soon as it comes out. I feel like I'm falling behind. Now that I use the cloud, the expectations to deliver are much higher. I want to make stuff that won't get hacked. These are the common threads that we see. So in terms of going back to the accreditations for the Azure environment, these are the kind of industry standard regulations that are met by the Azure Public Cloud. And from the raft of ISO accreditations across the global one, and if we focus down on some of the sort of ones that pertain more to the EU, around regional with the EU model clauses, that's pretty key for things like GDPR. And these are accreditations that are really hard to actually get and to maintain. And really to know that if you put data in a public cloud environment like Azure, that you're going to be able to tick that box pretty easily. It's a pretty compelling reason to move. So in terms of the cloud transformation program that New Signature runs, when we talk to a customer, there could be, see right at the top line, that's the sort of customer journey that you would typically go down. And when we see a customer, that could be anywhere along that journey, but effectively, if you start in the beginning, we investigate whether the business drivers and the value is really there to move to the Azure environment. We believe that in most cases the answer will be yes. And then from an assessment phase, we look at things like, is it technically feasible? Are there any legal or regulatory reasons why data and applications and compute can't be in the public cloud? And is it financially feasible? We can run a financial modeling exercise to prove to CIO, CFO level that the public cloud and Azure is the right answer. We can produce that financial model in that way. And then really we can go through a plan phase around how is a cloud operating model going to look? Do we have the right, adoption, governance, project plan, remediation? Do we know how we're going to do things like service management in the cloud? And then we can look at a pilot and then an implementation phase where we can either migrate applications or build an Azure platform in a hybrid way to allow you to start consuming the Azure public cloud in a hybrid way with born in the cloud applications. And then at the end of that, how do you operate? How do you maintain, monitor, secure, and optimize that environment in a cloud operating model, which is very different to an on-premise model, given that things like service management and ITIL don't work particularly well in cloud because it is such an agile environment. So we need to reinvent that and work out how is that actually going to work. And down at the bottom, you'll see the Cloud Transformation Program services and that New Signature offer across this journey. So if a customer already has some cloud services, and typically they've already gone through the investigate and assess phase, and they may have some Azure. And in that case, we'll do an Azure Health Optimisation, and then we'll look at an app factory process to migrate applications. And Julian will be talking a little bit more about that in the next section of this webinar. And then how do we manage and operate that? So we look at the cloud management for Azure. How do we manage that? So at the bottom, if there's no cloud services, we'll typically go through an Azure Envisaging Day, which is a free. We'll run through what these offers are and how much sort of investment you're looking at. There's a section on that. And then a cloud readiness assessment is the Azure Cloud ready? Again, this is the technical feasibility and financial feasibility piece. And then Azure Foundation, get the plumbing in place, get the connectivity there, get the Azure environment up and running ready to take on workloads. And then again, the App Factory and cloud management for Azure. So that's really how we think about the cloud transformation program and the various packaged offers that are available in that piece. So I'll just hand over to Julian now to take you through the next section on the slide around governance and the Azure Foundation and App Factory.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. So Julian Mallett. So I head up the Azure practice in New Signature. One of my roles inside New Signature is to help customers sort of understand all of the benefits of Azure, all of the features and services available to them, as well as sort of understanding how cloud flexibility, agility can be built into a customer environment. Now, there's over 600 services currently on the Azure stack, spread across something like 18 categories, ranging from things like compute resources, virtual machines hosted on the cloud, all the way through to things such as data analytics, IoT, and complex machine learning. So it's quite easy to see how solutions can become complex really, really quickly. The beauty of Azure is that you can start spinning up services quite quickly. Now, that's the agile nature of Azure. And we at New Signature, being a Microsoft pure play partner, we absolutely embrace the full technology stack on Azure, but also understand the value of governance at scale. So we've got this concept of getting the balance right. We help the organizations transform to the cloud, ensuring that traditional IT methods, methodologies can adhere to things like governance, security, delivery models, as well as enabling developers to work at pace and speed. So embracing both an agile and a DevOps type environment. One of our key sort of tenets of any solution is to build this governance as part of our foundational architecture. This sort of effectively allows us to put security in place, but enable the developers and prevent this kind of N number of weeks wait for infrastructure just to deploy their code. So we build our foundation solutions based on this 4-pillar approach. And essentially what we do is we look at our foundation design and ensure that we've got things like encryption, identity, software-defined networks, and compliance built into the core design. So encryption, as a default, we ensure that your data at rest or whether in transit is encrypted. We ensure that the SQL servers that you host or the Azure Packaged SQL servers all support TD encryption. Your operating system disks, we make sure that those attached disks to the VMs are encrypted. Storage accounts, there's a couple of keys that are provided with any storage account. We ensure that we enforce least privilege access to any of our solutions so that developers, for example, don't have access to production code. We try and abstract any credentials away from applications and use a technology such as Key Vault. Applications will then retrieve those credentials from Key Vault. Developers will never see the accounts. Operations team don't need to see the accounts. And to make this work, we have to overlay a role-based access model, and that's built on Azure AD. So your identity in the cloud will then start governing what you can access as part of our RBAC model. And with identity, you'll inherit capabilities such as multi-factor authentication, host-based access control, or even privileged identity management. And of course, any security solution, any governance solution needs integration to classic SIEM or security event monitoring solutions. So Azure fully supports that, and we build all of that into our foundational designs. From a networking perspective, we try to build isolation around services. So rather than just create one network and drop all of your assets that were traditionally on-prem into a single network, we start zoning and isolating services. You may have perimeter services that you need to expose web apps, for example, or you may have secure financial systems that you want to protect from the outside world. That's part of our foundational design, using technologies such as the next-gen firewalls or even network security groups, which is basic firewall capability within Azure. So as part of that foundational design, I talked about some concepts there. We will start with building up a subscription and helping customers define what subscription model is best for them and what hierarchy is required. Small organizations may only need 1 or 2 subscriptions, perhaps separating their production and non-production workloads. Large enterprises typically may need many tens of subscriptions just to allow them to exploit all of the benefits of Azure. So with a subscription, you may quite quickly run into certain service limits. Maybe a certain number of VNets are available to you. By spreading your workload across multiple subscriptions, you can overcome those limitations. On top of subscriptions, we then sort of build some of these other concepts. So resource groups, it's a logical grouping around your application, for example. It's where you want to maintain a common life cycle. Perhaps, for example, you have a finance application, you describe that with a resource group. And then on top of that, you may choose to apply tagging to resource groups. that could help you with billing in your organization, so that, for example, a finance department will always get an itemized bill of assets that they've consumed within Azure. And some of these other services that are on this slide, so things like Azure Automation, because you've just moved into a consumption-based model, what's the point, for example, of paying for workloads to run 24/7 when you only need them 8 to 10 hours a day? Using automation and tagging, you can start shutting down workloads in the out of hours period and bring them online automatically in the morning. And then finally, we also sort of build a security framework and security tools into our foundational design. Azure Security Center will provide us that governance and oversight across things like virtual machines, networking, application databases, and if nothing else, it will certainly expose any problems in the environment. So, for example, you know, someone has spun up a virtual machine and they've exposed a remote desktop to the outside world. Traditionally, that won't be visible. One second. So part of our App Factory assessment, which Brian talked about a minute ago on one of the previous slides, we go into your estate. We will perform a detailed assessment on your entire estate. So we look at all of the applications, how they integrate, what are their storage requirements, their compute requirements, and we'll go in on an app-by-app basis and start deciding whether that application is fit for cloud to migrate in its current form, or whether some sort of transformation is required to migrate that application to Azure. So, for example, there may be a PaaS equivalent of your database backend. We would look for those kind of opportunities. In a worst-case scenario, we would take that application workload as is, and then move it to Azure and refactor it at a later date. As part of that assessment, we would try and size those applications, you know, easy applications, perhaps a single server workload, all the way through to something that's really complex, that's got many integration touch points. Perhaps it's got integration to the outside world, to finance systems, to medical record systems, you know, any number of examples. We'll try and help with that decision on how you would transform to the cloud. You may even find that you've got applications that you can fundamentally retire as part of this app assessment. You discover that you've got multiple instances of an application, for example. As you transform to the cloud, there's a good opportunity to start retiring legacy applications, or even consolidate them. In the best case scenario, if you've got a development environment in-house, you could potentially re-architect that application and make it a cloud native or cloud first application. So as part of that assessment process, once we've determined whether you're going to re-architect the application or whether you're going to take the application as is, there's a trade-off against agility, how quickly you want to move to the cloud, or whether you want to move your application to a cloud-native application or cloud-first application. Some companies have compelling reasons to get out of their data center, for example. Maybe there's a renewal coming up. They need to move a lot of workloads at speed. So we use tooling typically to help customers migrate those workloads to Azure, and then potentially look for a future opportunity to clean up those applications or move them to cloud-first apps. You may have legacy applications in the estate, perhaps running on 2003. You need a remediation tool set. So in the middle, we'll use things like CloudHouse, for example, to containerize your app. Our typical operation, though, is to build you an Azure environment and then start installing your applications. So you've got a brand new clean data center, cloud data center, with the applications installed from scratch. And these all depend on things like, you know, the vendor supports you in Azure. You've got the source code, or you've got the install media. So I talked about tooling there. We use a number of tools. Depending on the size of the organization, So if you've got a large enterprise and lots of complex systems, we would typically put something like migrate into the environment to do the detailed discovery. We would run it for a number of weeks, and we would look for events in your environment. For example, month-end processes. Perhaps for some of the smaller enterprises, we would typically put something like Azure Migrate in, which was recently released or recently went GA. And we use that as our discovery tooling. And we'll always leverage data that customers can provide to us, whether it's in System Center or some other CMDB technology. We'll use that data as a starting point. And then finally, in terms of actually migrating to the cloud, again, we have a number of technologies available to us. Strata is a tooling that allows probably the most rapid migration to the cloud, because effectively, it takes your workload. This is what we call a dirty lift and shift. We'll take it exactly as is and run that application in the cloud within theoretically minutes, depending on the size of the machine. Through to Microsoft technology, Azure Site Recovery. Typically, we'll put in a DR as a service for customers, and we can use that same tooling to help migrate workloads to the cloud. As is, but we can actually do post-remediation tasks, so we don't inherit some of the existing on-prem problems that you may have. And then finally, Cloud House, we'll use that to wrap applications. So run, whether it's XP or 2003, run those applications, but on more modern technology. And Brian talked about sort of some of the case studies. So nationwide, this was a classic situation where the customer came to us. They were driven by industry or financial services regulation, where customers had to have access to their statements after they'd left the organization. So Nationwide wanted a solution really quick to allow them to meet the deadline of February this year. So we provided an MVP solution for these guys and then made it operationally ready. So we'll put all of the security boundaries, the networking, the controls, the governance that I talked about in one of the other slides, and we enabled these guys to hit their February deadline. House of Fraser is another example. They're currently running on Azure Classic services. We've gone in there. They originally asked for some staff augmentation, but we've gone in there now to become a trusted advisor to help them with their transform to Azure Resource Management Services, so modernizing their Azure estate and very much sort of embracing the DevOps methodologies in that organization. BP.
Yeah, so from a BP perspective, BP have got ambitions to exit their mega data centers and go all in on public cloud. There was various announcements in the press about this, and really they want to move into a new operating model in the cloud. So reimagine the way they manage and operate their IT in the Azure data center, and you saw the App Factory methods that Julian mentioned earlier. They're effectively using, every one of those methods where they're transforming a large number of applications to be cloud native apps in Azure, and also migrating some velocity applications where they need to exit the data centers very quickly and get those apps into Azure. So we're really building the Azure Foundation environment to support that App Factory process, and then executing on the App Factory to get all of their applications into the cloud so that they can achieve their data center exit by the end of next year. So just to, thanks Julian, so just to really finish off the webinar in terms of the packaged offers that we have available for Azure, and this maps back to the journey that I described earlier around Azure Envisaging, where we can do a 3 days consulting to look at what are the business and technical requirements that you need, and how can we solve those business challenges with a solution like Azure. Cloud Readiness Assessment, 2-day engagement where we can look at the business and technical requirements, and we can create a high-level analysis and some strategy and a plan to actually move to the next step in that journey. Azure Foundation, get all the plumbing and foundational layers in place to then support either some born in the cloud applications or some migration work in the future. Azure Health Optimisation, so this is the one where if you've already got Azure, we can spend 5 days just making sure that the environment is sized correctly You've got the right support in there from, you know, a governance and control perspective and an optimized perspective. And then in that factory, again, as per Julian, the way he's described it, you know, we can do the discovery. We can look at, you know, are your virtual machines on premise utilized, highly utilized? Is there an opportunity to move to smaller size virtual machines in Azure to then reduce the sort of costs of the ongoing optimized piece? And again, we can do that. And those are the prox lengths and the costs for those pieces, which are really fixed offers. For the app factory, we need to, out of the discovery, work out, you know, whether it's easy, hard, or complex applications, and we provide a cost per you know, that classification, and then we could look to help you achieve that sort of data center exit. So that's really the end of what we've got, Cassie. So I don't know if you want to go back to your.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Brian. My name is Fabienne, and I'm just going to talk about the licensing for Azure. So really, we're going to have a look at ways to save on the virtual machines and other services. So first, let's have a look at reserved instances. What are reserved instances? Well, they allow you to make savings on your virtual machines by prepaying for VMs for 12 or 36 months instead of paying for these on a pay-as-you-go basis. The longer you reserve them, the cheaper they are. So we're really looking here at VMs that you're using for 24/7. This is currently only available with EA, eSales, Key, but will be available as part of the Microsoft Cloud Agreement, also called CSP, later this month. And all the savings, those savings can go up to 82% if you also use what's called a hybrid benefit, which we'll go through in a second as well. And the virtual machines available for reserved instances are all the virtual machine apart from the A series VM, the AV2 series, and the G series that are available for reserved instances. And how do you pay for the reserved instances? Well, you pay for these through your monetary commitment. Or if there's not enough monetary commitment left to pay for the reserved instances, it just creates a bill in overage. And then you will have the reserved instances that will run for the amount of time that you've pre-reserved them for, so 12, 36 months, regardless of agreement anniversaries. And those VMs do give you best flexibility. You can reassign them, you can exchange them, and you can cancel them. So first, having a look at the assignment. When you create a reserved machine in Azure, you can decide where they're assigned. So they can either be assigned to a subscription or they can be assigned to the whole enrollment. If you assign them to a subscription, you can actually move them from one subscription to another, and you can also move them back to the enrollment. You can also exchange the virtual machines, the reserved instances that you make. So for example, if you've made a reserved instance for a D2V2, your workload becomes bigger. You now need something like, for example, a D12. You can swap that D2V2 for a D12. It doesn't have to be in the same region. It doesn't have to be the same type of VMs. All that happens is that you get a credit back for the unused month of the VM that goes into the new reserved instance. You can also cancel the virtual machines instances that you make. Again, it works in the same way where you get a credit back for unused months, and that goes straight into the monetary commit, but there is a 12% fee. And then all those reserved instances can be done easily through the Azure portal. So that's the portal where you normally go and create virtual machines. You can purchase reserved instances, exchange them, and cancel them easily in the portal there. Now let's have a look at the Azure Hybrid Benefits. The Azure Hybrid Benefit well, for Windows Server will allow you to pay only for the compute in Azure, and instead of paying for Windows Server images on a pay-as-you-go basis, you can pay for them using your own licenses. So I've used a real-life example here of a D2V2 in EU North. On the left-hand side is how much it would cost you to have that pay-as-you-go, and on the right-hand side here is how much it would cost for the compute plus using software shown for Windows instead of pay-as-you-go. So you can see there's about a 45% saving available there. And then as we've seen earlier as well, you can even get a bigger saving if you use reserved instances on top of that hybrid benefit. And how does it work? Well, to benefit from that hybrid benefit, you will need to purchase Windows Server with software assurance, and that gives you 2 VMs in Azure with up to 8 cores each, or 1 VM with up to 16 cores when you purchase 16 core licenses. With the Windows Server Standard, you can use either on premises or in the clouds, and then with Windows Server Data Center, you get those 2 VMs as well as being able to carry on using your on-premises unlimited VM entitlement. And then there's several ways in which you can actually deploy the hybrid benefit for Windows Server. You can upload it from the marketplace as an image. Also, when you create a virtual machine, you'll have a kind of a tick box there saying, do you want to save money? Do you have Windows Server software assurance? If you tick yes, it won't charge you for the Windows Server image. You can also upload a custom VM using PowerShell or Resource Manager template. And also fairly recently, Microsoft added the ability to be able to switch from on-premises billing to Azure pay-as-you-go billing and vice versa, either through a PowerShell or again through the portal. And then very recently, Microsoft have released the hybrid benefit for SQL Server. So that will allow you to pay for SQL Server using your own licenses with software assurance rather than pay-as-you-go in Azure. And that's available for both the SQL Server images in Azure on a VM and also for SQL Server database services like managed instances, for example, as long as the billing is on a per vCore basis. There's also a migration period provided with licensing to give you time to migrate your on-premises workload to the cloud. So you can run both on-premises workloads and cloud workloads with that one license for 180 days for the purposes of migration. And one thing to note as well, if you're running SQL in Azure, is that if you're using your own licenses using the hybrid benefits, you can also run a passive instance that you pay for, a passive instance that you won't have to pay for. You only license the actual active instance in the cloud. And then finally, for every other kind of workloads in the clouds, you also have the license mobility for software assurance. The license mobility software assurance benefit will allow you to use all of your server application software licenses with software assurance, and you can use that in the clouds instead of on premises. And that's all for me. I'll pass you back to Cassie for any questions.
Thank you, Fabienne, and thank you, Brian and Julian. I'm just going to pull up the questions box just to see if we do have any questions around anything that was covered today. If you do have any questions now, you can just pop them in the box on the right-hand side of your screen. What have we got here? So someone's asked, what options are there for a connection on premise data center environments to Azure? Brian, Julian, perhaps one for you?
Yeah, so I'll say that. So there's two key choices really with connecting to Azure. You can initially establish a VPN, so site-to-site VPN from your organization, or even a point-to-site from a device to Azure. Or more typically, we find in enterprises using ExpressRoute, which is a service that Microsoft and network service providers provide to allow direct integration either from your MPLS or from your data center straight into Azure.
Perfect. And yet another question here. Can you ensure that data hosted in an Azure region never leaves that geography?
So one thing when you establish your foundational Azure design, one of the choices that you have is where you start standing up your services. So typically Azure data centers are in sort of regional pairs. So for example, if you put data in UK South, which is in the London area, it will replicate, if you choose to do so, only to the UK West, which is in Cardiff. So absolutely, yeah, you can control that your data in your Azure subscription remains within region. It's only if you start putting software services over the top of it that then replicate out of your Azure subscription, but then you're in control of that data migration.
Perfect. Okay, so I think that's all for now. If anybody does have any questions, you can pop them in the box now. If not, and you think of anything that might spring to mind after the webinar, you can email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. We can put you in touch with New Signature and Bytes in order to answer your questions. If you have anything you'd like to ask around the packaged offers or anything that was covered in today, licensing, please do feel free to get in touch because we'll be more than happy to help you. And before I end, if I could just ask you to fill out the feedback form, which will just pop up on your screen once I close the webinar. It's literally just like 3 or 4 questions. It'll take you like 30 seconds. As we said, your feedback is much appreciated. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Julian, for your time today on the webinar. Thank you, Fabienne. And thanks everyone else for joining. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.